Gene Curran on Highland Radio.
And you're very welcome back. And I may not have secured an interview with Charles or Camilla this weekend, but I am delighted to be joined on air by phone by another Charles, and indeed someone who could be described as royalty in the music world in Ireland, the UK and further afield. I'm talking about Paul Charles, novelist, concert promoter, manager and talent agent, native of Magherafelt, County Derry, and he has just published his autobiography, or is about to be published, Adventures in Wonderland. Paul, thank you for taking time out this evening to talk to me.
Hi, Jean. Pleasure to do it. Thank you.
So you've already published about 25 books, most of them being mysteries and thrillers, and some non-fiction, a book on the Beatles and some aspects of the music business. But this is your first personal memoir, Paul. Was it something you had on the back burner for some time, or was it a more recent decision?
Well, I've been invited to do it several times over the years, and two things really. I didn't feel the time was right, and then when I kind of started to think about it around about the time of the COVID, when as everybody else had time in their hands, and I was kind of doing bits and pieces on it, I couldn't find a way into it that I was happy with, and then when I suddenly discovered if I used the timeline of my own life and set the different incidents and the different things that happened within that framework, then it pretty much rolled on from there.
And you've had a very, very colourful life since you started back. You've been described as one of the leading music agents on the planet. I think I read that somewhere. And over the past 40 years, you've worked with some of the biggest names in music, and Van Morrison, Ray Davis and the Kings, Jerry Rafferty, the Waterboys, Robert Plant, Tom Waits, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Don McLean. I could go on and on, Carly Simon. And you've been either a manager or an agent or a promoter with the Police and Dire Straits and Carol Keane, etc., etc. So your new book, Adventures in Wonderland, tells the story of your 40-year-long career. When and how did this all begin?
Well, the first group I worked with by accident. There were a bunch of mates of mine at school in Magherafelt, and I was about 15 years old, and they formed a group, and because I couldn't sing or play any instruments, the only way I could hang out with them was to find something to do with the band. And in those days, yes, there was a name manager, but really the important person outside of being in the band was the person that got the bookings. And I happened to know a gentleman by the name of Dixie Kerr, who played saxophone in a local show band, the Breakaways. And so I went down and knocked on his door and said, look, is there any chance that you could give a couple of relief spots to these bunch of mates? And he said, yeah, of course. And so they were called the Blues by Five, and because I got them a few bookings, they immediately appointed me as their manager, and off they all went.
Mm-hmm. And you say in the book yourself that you're not backward in coming forward and saying that you haven't got musical talent yourself. You tried the bagpipes at one stage and you tried the guitar at another, but you decided to go on the managing route.
Yes, I mean, I think there, again, as I say in the book, I think there are people that can make music and can make music naturally, and there are people like myself who might want to, but try as hard as they knew how to. If it's not in you, no matter who your tutor is or no matter what your thing is, you're not going to do it. But equally, I did find that I really enjoyed working with musicians and working with people who made music, because I've always been intrigued by humans that can make music or can write songs or can write lyrics. They've always kind of caught my attention, and I've always wondered, even to this day, how they go about the process of creating from absolutely nowhere some of these amazing songs and some of this amazing works, and again what they do on stage and how what they do on stage has become such a big ritual now worldwide, as the record industry has kind of waned over the years, it's become more and more important in a lot of artists' careers.
Mm-hmm. And you say in the book as well, we forget sort of back in the 60s, we didn't have mobile phones, we didn't have emails, and you had a very innovative way of getting people to contact you with a phone box down the road from your house.
Yes, yeah, we didn't have a phone in those days. We didn't have them for several days afterwards. But the phone box was kind of, again, it was a different kind of community thing. Probably the same as there are lots of places in Donegal. People would ring up the phone box somebody would be passed and they would answer the phone and they'd say, hello, da da da, and they'd say, oh, can we speak to Paul, please? And then they'd try and ascertain which Paul it was. And then they'd say, yeah, no problem, hang on a minute. So they'd set the phone down. They'd walk down to my house. They'd be saying hello, chatting to the mates or whatever. They'd knock on the window and say, Mr. Charles, there's a phone call for Paul. And, 5 times out of 10, she'd say, well, can you tell him he's having his tea and he'll ring them back later or something like that.
Fantastic. So you went to London around 1967. Was that just a chance to promote yourself and your music career? But before I go on to that, the Beatles was your big band back whenever you were a teenager, Paul, listening to the radio in your mum's kitchen.
Yeah, I remember even to this day, Jean, I remember walking into our house, running into the kitchen, and I was always kind of, eager to get somewhere as opposed to keen to leave somewhere else. And I ran in, and I was literally, physically, mentally, spiritually stopped in my tracks by this sound on the radio. And my mum was a big fan of, Frank Sinatra and Dean Martin. And her favourite was Emile Ford and the Checkmates, and she'd be listening out for these people, and she'd have the radio on, and this sound on the radio was just so hypnotic. It was so infectious, so melodic, so pleasing, so energetic, and it turned out to be the Beatles. And right there, then, really, I suppose, my life's path was chosen for me. And as we've discussed, I couldn't make music, but I could help people who made music get up on stage.
And you said in your book as well, I'm halfway through it and I'm finding it really, really enjoyable and very humorous, I have to say.
Thank you.
Your turn of phrase now, things been going in Shanksmere places, and something was massive and the crack was 90. You have a great way of telling the stories. But you say in your book as well that at that stage that the Beatles album, it was a toss-up between Rubber Soul and Sgt. Pepper's. But things changed in 1968 for you when you heard Astral Weeks by Van Morrison.
Yes, I was a fan of Vans by default, if you know what I mean. I mean, we were all, the same with people with Daniel O'Donnell now in Donegal. Everybody's very, very proud of him. We were very, very proud as being from Northern Ireland that this band called Them had a hit single in the English charts. Here Comes the Night got to be number 2, and so he was kind of, he was somebody that everybody looked up to. And it was a great single as well, a beautiful song and so well produced. And so I became a fan and of his work. And then, something happened. In those days, you wouldn't really know what it was because there wasn't the internet and there even wasn't NME and Melody Maker in those days, at least in Almara Felt. And so I moved to London and I was, browsing through, the record shops there, and eventually I come across an import copy of Astral Weeks. And I remember it vividly, actually. I'd been on my way to a show that had been cancelled because Terry Reid was ill. And I went into the shop and I didn't have enough money because it was an import, so it was extra, so I paid a deposit on it. I scooted back down to Wimbledon. I, scrounged money from my mates, cut the tube back up to Piccadilly Circus with another thing, and bought this album. It was Astral Weeks, and literally it just was like nothing I'd ever heard before, and I haven't heard anything since like it. It was just, it's not a record that you can kind of put on at a dinner party, or there's not a record that you can kind of just put on and continue writing or working on something else. It's just something you must give yourself over to, and the rewards you get for doing that are just so impossibly overwhelming, and it's just incredible, And then I kind of, when I kind of was, working in London at a band from Belfast called Frupp, we were working around. I was doing gigs, doing more and more, getting a bit more successful, and then I kind of found myself in a position whereby I was going to see Van at a club, and again, just as a fan. When he came to London once, and because I knew the promoter well, and then so I rang up the promoter afterwards and said, look, Van hasn't played in Belfast since them days. Is there any chance at all of getting him to come over to do some dates, And so the promoter said he would mention to Van. Van seemed interested. I put together, ideas for a tour. which was 3 nights in Dublin, 2 in Belfast, and 1 in Cork. And I thought everything was going well. Then I heard that manager was no longer working with Van anymore, and so my dates were in the bin. So then I rang up a mate I had in the record company and asked him, had they appointed a new manager? She said yes, and it's Bill Graham, and gave me his number. And I rang up Bill Graham, and again, we'd never promoted any dates in England before. We'd worked as agent, whatever. And I explained my situation to Bill Graham. Bill Graham, one of the biggest promoters in the world, and here I am, a wee lad from Marfelt. I'm going, any chance we could get Van to come over to do a few shows? And I expected to be laughed off the phone, but he was very nice to me, and very kind of conversational, very keen and whatever, and dealt with enthusiasm well. And he said, look, Paul, the reality is we just could not afford to come over to do some dates in Ireland all the way from America. It just wouldn't work out financially. So I crossed my fingers behind my back and said, well, look, okay, in that case, I'll promote the whole tour. And he said, okay, send us some figures and a route. And so we went through that, and, I'd done all that. And then they kind of rang back and said, look, we work with other promoters in England. We're going to have to give them an opportunity as well. So then I realised I was competing with it. So I made my offer. The offer went through. I got a call back a couple of nights later saying, the offer was good. They were going to put it to Van, and I got a call another few nights later, and they said, look, Van has approved it. The deal's on. He's going to come and do the dates with you. And then I discovered later I hadn't got the tour because of my offer being the biggest offer. I got the tour because during those days I was also writing for music papers in Belfast, City Week and Thursday, and in it I would write about Van quite a bit, and but whatever news we could get from America about what he was doing or whatever. And apparently we had this situation whereby I'd been to see Demick and Armstrong, and they introduced this song, and I said, oh, this is Friday's Child. It's a Van Morrison original, and I'd never heard it before. And I tried to get it in the record shops, and nobody would have it. So I wrote in my column the next week saying, look, I heard this great song. It's called Friday's Child. If anybody out there knows how I can get a copy of it, could you please let me know? And the week after that, there was a package arrived in the City Week offices addressed to me, and I opened it up, and it was a major minor copy of Gloria, and on the B side was Friday's Child, and also was a beautiful letter from Van's mother, thanking me very, very much for writing about Van. And Van had heard my name through his mum telling me what was in City Week, and so he recognised the name, and off we went on an adventure, and I became his agent, promoter, and then manager for the next 6 or 7 years.
Fantastic. And was that the beginning of the big time for you, Paul, once you had established yourself with Van? Did other acts then hear about you, and your reputation just grew and grew after that?
Yes, I mean, again, it's one of those things, your best adverts are the people that you work with, in terms of, when people are kind of thinking of moving or going or whatever, they kind of go, okay, well, look, who do the Beatles work with, or who does Rod Stewart work with, or who does Leonard Cohen work with, or and if you work with somebody like Van Morrison and people know you work with Van Morrison, then that means that the next door you knock on is open more quickly and whatever. So it kind of we got through the Van tour, we got to work with Jackson Browne that I've been chasing for ages, and because we worked with Jackson Browne, we got Crosby, Stills and Nash. And because we work with Van, actually, I thought the Undertones came to work with us because of Van, but it turns out afterwards that they said, look, of course we weren't going to say no to you. You work with the Buzzcocks, so we wanted to be with the same agent as the Buzzcocks. So you always get that. All the acts you work with, when you're starting off first, nobody will take your call. When you're starting off first, nobody really wants to know because you don't have a reputation, and so why would they go with you? Then as time passes and you get your first act and that works well, and the second or whatever, then it becomes a different thing. You ring up and your reputation is before you, and it just makes it all that wee bit more easier.
Uh-huh. And all of these things are in your book, and the book has 42 chapters, with some with a few pages, some slightly longer, and it goes from the beginning to where you are now. And there are a few stories now that I just find myself smiling at. One was when you went to interview Rod Stewart, and we played Maggie May at the beginning of the show tonight, and I sort of got a wee smile whenever you said that you made your way by tube, by bus and Shanksmere to the interview, and he was recording Maggie May, so you knew you were going to get him when he was in the recording studio.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great adventure for me. Again, in those days, same time, I was the London correspondent, if you will, for City Week on Thursday, and I'd actually 3 different interviews to go and see Rod Stewart and whatever to do a piece on him, and the 3 times fell through. So the lady Carol, actually from the record label, again Warner Bros., thought, okay, if I fix Paul up to go and see him in the studio, then he's not going to be not there because he's going to be recording at the same time. So when she fixed it up, I went up to Morgan Studios in the wilds of Harlesden, and I kind of went to the studio, and I'd never been in the studio before, and the sound system just knocked me over. I mean, I started dreaming about if I could get these speakers back into my bed set, they would just, I would be living in heaven, even though the speakers were probably the same size as my bed set. But anyway, they were working on Maggie May, and so when they finished working on Maggie May, Rod came over and we went through to another room. And there was definitely a party atmosphere in the studio. It was the same with the Faces. They were having a good time. Everybody in the entourage was always enjoying themselves. So we kind of left them having a bit of fun. Did the interview. Very nice interview. Very nice man to talk to. Preoccupied as he is now, I think, as well with his hair, but still nonetheless very, very nice man. And we came back into the studio, and it was doom and gloom. There was kind of like a dark cloud had come through the door as we walked out, and it was just silence. And it turned out in our absence, in the middle of the party, and somebody had sat upon Ray Jackson's mandolin and smashed it. And so then they were about to do, Mandolin Wind as I was leaving. But anyway, he was very nice about it. He said, look, it's cheap anyway, and it breaks easy. Don't worry, it happens all the time on the road. He played in a very popular band at the time, Lindisfarne. And anyway, I headed off into the night. They were kind of getting back into their fun mood again, and another mandolin obviously came up, and they obviously recorded the track.
Uh-huh. And when you went to London, I suppose you took a leap of faith that you're going to make it big over there. But another story, you took a leap of faith, I suppose, literally, whenever you had to jump out of a window in 1976 when your apartment went on fire, and you had to put your trust in Vincey McCusker, one of your band members, to rescue you.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a nice memory to remember, but again, it's kind of, I suppose in a way, by putting it in the book, I dealt with it because again, what the story was that I was working with a band called Frupp, Belfast band, and 2 of the members were staying in the same house as I was, anyway, it's in a very, very hot summer, and very, very hot summer, and I remember, going to bed at night, and I couldn't sleep because it was so hot. And then all of a sudden, I heard this, what felt like massive thunderstorm rain falling because I was on the eaves, falling on the roof above me. And I think, oh my goodness, great, the weather is broken. I'll be able to get to sleep now. And it kept on, in inverted commas, raining and raining. And I thought, I've never known rain like this in my life. Oh, my goodness. So I went to the window, opened the window, stuck my head out. And the first thing I noticed was I looked down at the pavement, and the pavements were bone dry. And I was kind of going, how can the rain be so heavy? And the pavements are bone dry. And anyway, then I kind of turned around to the right, and all these flames rushed past me. And I kind of immediately realized it wasn't rain. The house was on fire, or the apartment was on fire. So I closed the window again. I poured a bottle of lemonade over a towel, put the towel to kind of seal the door for my room out. And then I really was trapped. I couldn't find a way out because the door, there was flames on the other side of the door, and I could hear them rattling away. Luckily enough, the guitarist in the band, who was also in that first band, the Blues by Five, was a gentleman by the name of Vincent McCusker from Mackaraw, and he was in the flat underneath mine. And so I stuck my head out the window, was shouting for people, no one's come along. He's, obviously woke up by all the noise, stuck his head out the window and said, okay. And he saw the flames, he saw what was happening, and then so he said, okay, what you're going to have to do, you're going to have to kind of come out on the roof, slide down over the roof because of the bay window, and then you're going to have to get and have your feet dangling right by me, and when I say so, just drop, and as you pass, I'll catch you. And I was thinking, okay, now let's see what else I can think of doing, because that's not going to work for me. And anyway, it got to be such a desperate state. I mean, I even considered jumping down onto the pavement. I figured I'd probably break a couple of legs, maybe something else, but it wouldn't be as bad as getting burned. But anyway, he said, look, man, you got to do it. So anyway, eventually I did it. I kind of went out, and I can just feel me go. And I got to that point whereby I was saying to myself, I'm not going to be able to do this. I know I'm not going to be able to do this. But at the same time, I was doing it. At the same time, I was going through the motion of doing what I needed to do to survive. I think we all have that thing in us, and I kind of slid down over the bay window. I then caught my chest on the hook on the gutterine and kind of ripped it open a bit. So when I came to my head, I kind of paddled my hands furiously to make sure my head was out. I got to the point whereby I was kind of, it's either now or never. So he said, right, I'm ready. So I dropped. He grabbed me as I was passing, literally under the arms, with superhuman strength, pulled me in, and we both fell into his room in his apartment, and I passed out, basically, and came to minutes later when I was being led out of the house. But, the thing is, it was just, that surprised me was that how your instincts, how, no matter what you think you can or can't do, how your need for survival, how your need to continue to breathe air will make you do what you need to do, no matter what the risk may appear to be.
Mm-hmm. And those were two stories that I just picked out tonight, and I don't want to go into them all because, of course, we just want to give the listeners a taste of what to read in the book. But just maybe one more story, and that was your search for Paul Skeffington.
Yes. You have read the book. Well remembered. Yeah. No, I thanks. I basically pretty much decided at a point in my career that if I could only find the new Paul Simon, I mean a young Paul Simon, and somebody who could write songs like Paul Simon and Jerry Rafferty and people like that, which is where the name Skeffington came from, that, and now with that point of being the age that I was, I could go off and help them with a successful career. And I searched for ages and ages and ages. I kind of, went through all the tapes that were coming in. I went to see everybody that all new acts I could, all, in clubs all over. I even took some adverts in the Belfast Telegraph, and nothing doing. And I also worked at that stage with a gentleman called Paul Brady. And Paul was doing a week of the Main Fiddler. And as usual, I was there. It was a Friday night, I think it was, and so there was a great crowd in, and there was people, who kind of wanted to have a good time, and were having a few drinks or whatever. So I thought it's a bit packed in here. So until Paul comes in, I'll go into the quieter acoustic room, have a cup of tea and a bit of peace and quiet, and then come into the other. And anyway, I was sat down. It was called an open mic night, when they would have, say, maybe 5 artists on, and each of those 5 artists would bring some guests, and the guests would be the supporters and would buy a drink from the bar, and that's how they made it work. Anyway, I went in, got my cup of tea, sat down at a table by myself, and I'm, sitting there, relaxing, whatever, and Paul Skeffington, my name that I'd given this artist, walks onto stage. But the only difference was it wasn't a he, it was a she, and it was Tanita Tickerham. And I remember to this day something that she did that I felt was very, very special, is that, she obviously hadn't brought any of her friends with her. She was from Basingstoke. And so she was on stage, and when she was on stage, none of the other people were really interested, so they were all talking to various degrees. So she was kind of about halfway through her second song when the noise from the table closest to the stage was so overpowering that they were drowning her out. And so what she did was she kept playing the guitar, she stopped singing, she walked away from her mic, she walked over to their side of the stage, and she just glared down at them until one by one they became self-conscious and stopped talking. And then she made her way back to the microphone, still playing her guitar, and struck up singing her song again. And I just thought this was incredible. And it turned out, Jean, that this was her first ever time on stage, and I just thought that's, to be that sussed, to be that, to be not be rude or not be rude or arrogant or shout at them or whatever, just by kind of virtually having the power, the willpower to put this energy on them that these people stopped talking and allowed her to continue to do her set. I've never ever forgot that. And anyway, I met her a few days later, and we became her agents. And then, because we couldn't find her a manager, or she wasn't feeling comfortable with managers, she invited me to be her manager, and we went off and had some great adventures together.
Amazing. Do you ever pinch yourself sometimes to see that this all happened, Paul, in your lifetime?
Yeah, you do, and I find it quite unbelievable, because again, there's an honest story in the book about the first time I met Ray Davies. I mean, I was a massive fan of the Kinks, loved all their singles, really loved them, and I remember going up to the Embassy Ballroom in Derry to try and get a gig for my band, the Blues By Five. And in those days, the best way to do it was to hitch and go and see them, or go and see them, rather than phone or whatever. You didn't have faxes, you didn't have emails. And so I went to see this manager. I knocked on the door. They said, "Oh no, he's doing something." I said, "Well, I don't mind waiting for him." I knew that, just to be politely persistent. So I would then, and he was routining go-go dancers, and they were dancing to Waterloo Sunset. And I heard the song that day probably about, I don't know, maybe 20 times. And it was just burned into my brain forever. I mean, I'd loved it before, but I was this is just really one of the perfect sounds. And then you fast forward from there until, say, I think maybe it was about 12 years later, I meet Ray Davies. He's looking for an agent, and a mutual friend has put us together. And you're kind of kicking yourself. You're going, hang on a minute, how did a wee man from Marfelt, who managed the Blues By Five and whatever, and was, how did I ever get to meet somebody like Ray Davies? And then also to find out that he's such a sweet man, just an incredible gentleman, and I've been working with him ever since.
Well, I know that as time is beating us tonight, and we haven't even looked at your involvement on the acoustic stage in Glastonbury, or your Asgard agency. But chapter 41, you give an attempt, and I say when you give an attempt, it must be a hard job to do, to pick out your 20 top live acts. And I have to say that 75% are my favourite artists as well. But if you had to pick one, just to give a quick summary, what would it be? I know you're very fond of the Waterboys live. Paul.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a problem, the question. The thing with that question is, I definitely have answers for it. But you know what? If we talk again tomorrow night, I would go to a different act. Some of the wonderful gigs I saw would have been, the Carpenters at the London Palladium, Van Morrison at the Rainbow, Mary Margaret O'Hara at the Dominion. The Waterboys in any number of festivals. Waterboys are just such a powerful act live, and they get better and better. And the same with the Hot House Flowers. So I suppose I'm chickening out, Gene, and not kind of selecting one, but any of those, any or all of those, and Nick Lowe, and you and I could talk for another half hour, and I'd keep on adding names to it.
Mm-hmm. And as I said, hopefully the listeners have got a taste of what to expect in your book. And it has been getting really, really good reviews now. Joseph O'Connor, best-selling author, said it was a wonderful, enjoyable memoir. John Connolly said a fine piece of work. And Tony Clayton-Lee in the Irish Times said, from working with superstar rock stars and the creme de la creme of singer-songwriters to bring in the Clash to Ireland, the Undertones to the UK, Van Morrison into the Mystic, Paul Charles knows the music business inside out, and the adventures in Wonderland spills the beans in fine style. So plenty of really, really good reviews for the book. And it's been published now, it's been launched now in a fortnight's time, Paul, am I right?
It's coming out on the 19th of May, and it's on Hot Press Books, and you can either get it on their website or on any of the usual bookstores, and I think even McFadden's and Ramelton are going to have copies on sale as well.
Fantastic. And then you're doing a few tours as well. I have some of the dates here now. Friday the 19th, you're in the Irish Cultural Centre in Hammersmith, but you're in Bangor on the 21st of May, and you are in Dublin on the 26th of May. And you are in Seamus Heaney's home place. I suppose that's the nearest one to Mahrafelton, to us here in the Northwest. That's the 7th of June, where you'll be talking about the book. And as I said, I could go on for another half hour more with you, Paul, but hopefully the listeners have got a taste of what the book is about, and I'm certainly enjoying it. And Billy Robinson gets a mention in it, Donegal gets a mention in it, and
exactly, yeah. And no, Billy's one of the best sound engineers I ever worked with.
Well, I'm sure the White Rabbit will take you down a few more rabbit holes before the adventures are over. And I love some of your chapters as well. Like Nothing Toulouse, the time that you had the concert in Toulouse. It was just Crosby, Stills and Nash were playing, I think, there, and there's a pun there on the word to lose. Like there's a lot of times in the book where I sort of find myself giving a wee smile and saying that's very clever indeed. So thank you so much for taking time out to talk to me tonight, and every success with the book. And you never know, our paths might cross in Ramelton sometime.
Thank you very much, Jean. Thank you.
Morinia Curra the Quina is féidir leat a bhraca bhfuil